Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this webinar on caring about climate change. My name is Susan Smith, and I am the campaigns manager at SCVO. And I'm leading on a new project that SCVO is exploring, looking at the role of the voluntary sector in the transition to net zero and how we can support voluntary organisations to reduce their own carbon output and support their communities to reduce their carbon output too. We have some great speakers with us today. I'm delighted we have Carol Mack, the Chief Executive of the Association of Charitable Foundations, and she's going to talk to us about the funders' commitment on climate change. I think there's a very exciting role for funders in this agenda, but it'll be interesting to hear a little bit about that balance between support and encouragement that the sector requires. We also have Ben Twist from Creative Carbon Scotland. Creative Carbon Scotland have been doing some great work with the arts sector on reducing their carbon footprints. And my feeling is that the arts sector is maybe a little bit further ahead than the rest of the non-environmental voluntary sector. So I think Ben's going to have some really useful information and advice for our audience today. And finally, we have Teresa Bray, who is Chief Executive of ChangeWorks. ChangeWorks is one of Scotland's most successful social enterprises, and it provides a range of services to businesses and individuals to help become more environmentally sustainable. I'm sure many of you are aware of its recycling service, which it provides to businesses and charities. SCVO has been using that for quite a long time now. So Teresa is going to be able to chat to us about some of the practical things that organisations can do and the ways you might want to start addressing this issue if you haven't already. So before we ask our speakers to chat to you for a short period, I've just got a little bit of housekeeping. First up, this webinar is being recorded, so you are able to share it afterwards with your colleagues and watch it back if you found it useful. We'll be running, those are going live, and if you could just respond immediately, that would be great. Please do use the chat function to chat to each other, introduce yourselves to each other. At SCVO, we're really interested in hearing what people think about this issue and what challenges as organisations you might be facing. And so please feel free to comment on that in the chat. If you want to ask a question of the panel, then you can put questions in the Q&A function of the dashboard, and we'll get to as many of those as we possibly can. We've had some questions pre-submitted. So once all the speakers have had their chance to speak, we'll go through some of those questions at that point. So we're going to kick off with our first poll, which is going live now, and it's a very simple one. Does your organisation have an environmental policy? Yes or no? It immediately went to 100% yes. But I did not think that was going to be the final answer. It's looking pretty even at the moment. It actually, to make a confession, SCVO has only recently launched its own environmental policy. So it's not surprising to see that 60% of you say that your organisations don't have an environmental policy, and 41% of you say you do. So our speakers will bear that in mind, I'm sure, when they're presenting to us. So first up, we've got Carol Mack, who, as I said, is Chief Executive of the Association of Charitable Foundations. Carol, I'll pass over to you.
Thanks very much, Susan, and great to see you all on this call this afternoon. Perhaps if I just start by introducing ACF so you can understand our perspective on this. Our mission is to support foundations to be ambitious and effective in the way that they use their resources for social good. Like SCVO, we're a membership body. We have over 400 foundations from across the UK. We're UK-wide in membership, and they fund a very diverse range of issues: social justice, the arts, education, medical research, choral music of the Church of England. You name it, we will have a member who funds it. At ACF, we're passionate about the work and value of foundations. At their best, they're the most transparent, effective way of transforming private wealth into public benefit. They're organisations with their own charitable purposes. The majority are registered charities. What sets them apart is that they have capital and independence and often have long time horizons. As I'm sure you're well aware, the scientists agree that we have only a decade to avoid the worst consequences of climate change. If we don't as a society take significant action by 2030, the scientists are agreed that we will trigger severe and irreversible change. That's very little time at all. A child born today won't even have started secondary school by 2030. We're already seeing the impact in our lives: flooding, record-breaking temperatures, extreme weather events. The scale of the climate threat and the scale of the solutions needed means that this is an issue for all parts of civil society and for all charitable foundations. Climate change isn't just an environmental issue. It will have a huge impact on the life chances of children and young people, which is why so many of them are taking such passionate leadership on this issue. It's also a health issue, an equality issue, an educational issue, an economic, cultural, scientific, security issue, and a local community issue. In short, climate change, the climate crisis, affects every aspect of our lives. We're going to have to make major changes to the way we live, to reduce emissions in line with net zero, and to deal with the impacts of changes to the climate that are already locked in. And it's vital that the voices of the communities that you care about and the causes you represent are taken into account as society makes and takes the decisions that it will need to take on this road ahead. What are funders doing? Well, in 2019, a group of our members launched the Funder Commitment on Climate Change, which is hosted by ACF. And I'm going to share my screen now to show you what the Funder Commitment on Climate Change entails. Hopefully you can see that. As you can see, it offers a framework for all kinds of foundations to start thinking about climate change. It's a way in and not a heavily policed process. It uses straightforward everyday language, and it offers actions that any foundation can take. 63 foundations have signed up in the UK, and through ACF's European links, there are also now funder commitments in France and in Spain built on this model, and there is work towards an international version. So what do funders that sign this commitment commit to do? They've committed to taking action on climate change in 5 areas: educating and learning about climate change impacts and solutions, committing resources to tackling and adapting to climate change impacts, integrating climate considerations within existing programs, stewarding their investments for a post-carbon future. Many foundations, as I said at the beginning, have their own capital, which they use to fund their own grant making. Some foundations don't. Corporate foundations will often be getting an annual gift from their corporate company. That's fine. You don't have to have investments to sign up to this commitment. The signatories are committing to decarbonise their own operations, and also, and perhaps most importantly, to report on progress annually. And I'll stop sharing the screen now. At ACF, we've just published the first summary report setting out actions that signatories have taken over the past 14 months. What impact is all of this having on the wider sector? Well, it's important to understand what signing the commitment represents. The commitment isn't saying that foundations should stop funding what they fund and divert all of their resources to environmental issues. Frankly, a bit of that is needed. I don't have the figures, but a very small proportion, a tiny proportion of foundation funding goes to addressing the causes of climate change, and some foundations are adjusting their funding to focus more on this. But the commitment, as you'll have seen, recognises that funders have their own vital charitable purposes. So it encourages them to apply a climate lens to the way they pursue their mission, whatever that mission is. To apply a climate lens to the way they make their grants, steward their investments, and run their own operations. So to give you just 2 examples of this, and there are many fantastic examples in the report we published, the National Lottery Heritage Fund is working with the Fit for the Future network It's paying the membership costs for grantees to join the network and receive help on becoming more sustainable. But you don't have to be a big funder like the National Lottery Heritage Fund to take action. One funder I'm thinking of is the Cloudsley Foundation in London. One of its programs supports the maintenance of the fabric of church buildings. And recently it funded some churches to install solar panels. That not only reduces the church's energy costs, but actually it's providing a new revenue stream for the church. And there are many more examples in the report we published last month. So to wrap up and allow you to hear from the other panelists, I'm looking forward to hearing from them too. I'd say that this seems like a very daunting challenge. And I'd just like to reflect that over the last 14 months, the COVID pandemic has to some extent put the climate crisis a bit on the back burner, and perhaps rightly so. The COVID pandemic has been absolutely devastating for communities and for many of us personally as individuals. I don't like to talk about drawing positives from such a terrible and traumatic time, but the COVID crisis has shown us that we can make radical change when we accept the need to do this and when we act together. It's also shown that early action can prevent catastrophic consequences. And I think there's learning from this for the climate crisis that we are facing. It won't be easy to get to a net zero world, but it is easy for all of us to make a start down that road. There are lots of resources out there and lots of organisations that are already taking steps in that direction. And frankly, making a start is the most important thing to do. Thanks very much for listening and look forward to hearing from the next panellist.
Thanks very much, Carol. That's really interesting. There's much food for thought there. And you've given me some ideas for questions, which I'll come back to after we hear from the other speakers as well. I think what you're highlighting is not just opportunities for funders, but also opportunities for organizations there in terms of, that example of the church and the solar panels. That's a great opportunity for an organization, a community organization, to actually start generating something positive, their own energy and income. Okay, we'll move on to Ben now, who can tell us a little bit more about Creative Carbon Scotland. Thanks,
Susan. And Carol has covered quite a lot of things that I would have spoken about, so that it's great in many ways she's introduced some of those topics. I'm Ben Twist, and I'm the director of Creative Carbon Scotland, which is a charity connecting the arts, screen and creative industries on one side, and also increasingly heritage and climate change on the other side. Just to give you a bit of background, I was a theatre director for most of my career up until about 2010 or so. And that's been very important because I'll come to this later, perhaps in a way, that, but I think because I came from the sector that we were working with, it provided me with a sort of bank of trust that people could listen to me with some confidence, and I knew their pain, if you like. We've actually been going since 2011. I gave up theatre directing and did an MSc in carbon management to give me some of the knowledge and the expertise. It started off with just me and an idea, with support from the sector, from festivals, the Edinburgh festivals, the theatre sector and the visual arts sector. But now there are 10 of us with 7.5 full-time equivalent from arts to environmental backgrounds, which I think really demonstrates the demand and the change that it's become over the decade. It's become much more important. And crucially, we've had strong support from the core arts funder, Creative Scotland, from the very beginning, and we are really a strategic partner of Creative Scotland. What we do, why we do what we do, it was coming our way anyway, and I would say it's coming yours if it isn't there already. Climate change was on the agenda, which is why I took that MSc. And I realized that influencing organizations, of which the cultural sector is one part, but also I think the third sector generally is another, were going to be very important. And I think that's increased even more. There's stuff that needs to be done on the corporate scale and the government scale, but actually the third sector is absolutely crucial, I think, to this. I also wanted to support the sector that I love and work in. I've worked in the arts for a long time, and I'm a big theatre fan. So what we do is we provide tools, methodologies, advice and support. And one of the things that you'll perhaps be familiar with is that there are quite often, there's only one person maybe in your organization or the organizations that you fund that are working on climate change. So they can get quite lonely. So it's very important, I think, that there's somebody they can ring up or email, and there's a friendly voice at the other end who can help them through a problem. And the problems are very often ones that other people have faced, and we can point them to people who've got a way forward. We run a thing called the Green Arts Initiative, which is a community of practice, really. We bring organizations together who want to work on their climate, in their environmental performance, and thinking about adaptation as well. I'll come back to that. And that's just that people learn from each other, they learn from us. And we run an annual conference when really the experts, who are the people who are doing it, speak to each other. And we have a great deal of resources on our website, and I'll put in the chat later a link to that. Quite importantly, I think we translate between the two worlds, because I think often the cultural sector doesn't understand some of the things that climate change is talking about, and climate change doesn't understand the things that culture is talking about. And cultural buildings particularly have sort of quirky profiles and quirky usage. And so we make the link between the two. I think a lot of what we do is bridging the gap. We do some advocacy and leadership, but importantly, I think we don't just work on carbon reduction. We're also increasingly working on adaptation to the impacts of climate change, which Carol touched upon, the fact that we're increasingly seeing severe weather events, we're seeing flooding, temperatures are going to rise and what have you. So there's a lot going on already that we're asking people to start thinking about and helping them do that. And we also find ways in which culture and cultural organizations and practitioners can contribute to the work of climate change organizations. So we're not just injecting climate change into culture, we're also injecting culture into climate change, because we think there are useful skills in our world that can be applied over there. And perhaps crucially for the funders who are here today, we work with what I call the structuring organizations, those organizations that create the structures that the cultural sector works within. So we work with Creative Scotland and its funding approach. I've had conversations with one or two other funders. We work with people in Ireland who are in the same area, so that the cultural sector, in order to change, needs to know that the rules within which it works, from the government down, are encouraging that change and facilitating that change. Otherwise, it can't make the change. So those structuring organizations are absolutely crucial. And just to touch upon something that Carol mentioned, the importance of climate justice in all of this. There's a very, very strong connection between climate change and equalities. And I think we need to think about not only the impacts of the decisions that you and others are making, the distributive justice, you might say, but also the procedural justice, making sure that decisions about climate change are made fairly, so that everybody has a say in that, as well as that the results of those decisions are fair. One couple of last things I want to say, some successes really, and things perhaps that others can learn. We have a very positive approach where we're always, we're a friendly lot, and we're talking about solutions and not problems. Problems do arise, but we try to find a way around, and often there are those solutions. There's normally somebody who knows, who's tried this before, and we'll do our best to find them. Very importantly, when we were starting out, we run a mandatory scheme now for Creative Scotland, so that continually funded organizations have to report their carbon emissions and have a carbon management plan. We provided what I call a scaffolding, so that nobody was going to fall. It wasn't difficult to do. We provided lots of support there. We provide those opportunities. We look for new ways of working, new areas of work. We look for resilience, looking at business and organizational plans. And there are, of course, some lower costs if you reduce your carbon emissions. But that probably won't last. The easy bit's been done. We've got to do some quite tough stuff in the future. And I think that's probably enough for me, and I'll pass back to Susan.
Thanks very much, Ben. That's also very interesting. I'll come back to what you mean about the tough stuff, because personally, I think that one of the big issues in this arena for non-environmental organisations and non-environmental individuals as well is fear. And I think maybe one of the things we want to try and do is try and help people overcome some of that fear. And that's why we're having events like this. And hopefully Teresa will also be able to provide us with some information that will help overcome some of that fear. So I'll pass over to Teresa Bray from Changeworks now.
Good afternoon, everybody. I've got a few slides that I am going to be sharing, which has got a number of contact numbers for you. So please bear with me for a minute while I just share my screen and get the presentation. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, everybody. Just a very brief introduction to the existing Changeworks. Changeworks is Scotland's leading environmental charity and social enterprise, which is actually delivering positive solutions for low carbon living. We collaborate with the Scottish Government, local authorities, housing associations, businesses, community groups, and individuals to take meaningful, urgent action to tackle climate change. Our vision is for a world where everyone, and that's one of the important factors, is everyone is able to live, work and enjoy life with a low carbon impact. We're not a campaigning organisation. Our priority and expertise lie in finding practical ways to cut carbon, promote sustainable energy and help more people enjoy an eco-friendly lifestyle. We support a whole range of people and organisations to improve energy efficiency, reduce fuel poverty, install renewables, prevent waste and inspire low carbon behaviours. We have almost 200 enthusiastic employees and volunteers across Scotland, and our values are passion, integrity, innovation, collaboration and empowerment. These are the values which drive us in everything we do. Although not a campaigning organisation, we are active members of both the Existing Homes Alliance, which seeks to influence government policy on, as it says on the tin, existing homes, and part of the Climate Emergency Response Group, which is a group of leaders across many sectors who actually sought to influence the government to actually take full action on the climate emergency. So that's a bit of background to Changeworks. Before I start talking about what you as organisations can do, I think we first have to remember we've got to think what support could be provided for clients and staff on the climate emergency. Changeworks, alongside the WISE Group, SCARF and the Energy Agency, all provided services through Home Energy Scotland, which is a Scottish Government funded project managed by the Energy Saving Trust, which operates across Scotland, which provides advice and support on saving energy and keeping warm at home. Funding options, including Scottish Government grants and interest-free loans, and installing renewable energy at home. It's a service, it is the main referral route into the Scottish Government's fuel poverty programmes, and this year the Scottish Government is committed £50 million to improve the housing of those who are in fuel poverty. So those with qualifying benefits and low energy efficiency homes could be looking at new heating systems, insulation, renewable heating systems going in. So it is definitely worthwhile thinking, are there any of your clients who may benefit, or staff? We've often found that a number of staff who may be working part-time hours really will benefit from this system. There is an ability to set up partnership referral arrangements, which we have with a whole range of operations across Scotland. Where you're located will depend which organisation you interface with, but this operates across Scotland, so people can make referrals directly in through a portal. There's a free phone number for any individuals to phone up, and the link there is to Home Energy Scotland. So having thought about your clients and the staff, then what about the support for you as organisations? Again, the Scottish Government has funded free support to small and medium-sized organisations, and this is operated alongside Home Energy Scotland by the same organisations I mentioned, and it is their energy efficiency business support services. They their website's got a whole range of resources, and the advice can be provided. The level of advice and support does depend on what your levels of emissions are. There is access to interest-free government loans with cashback as well, which is currently running at 30%, so sort of grant subsidy for these activities. And they are very much promoting actions which actually will save you money over the long term, but recognizing that the funding of these, because they make a return, does require it. So it is focused mostly on those either with buildings or transport fleet. But I have a few examples of the organisations that have benefited from it. Sort of it's Whiting Bay on the Isle of Man Community Trust benefited from actually installing, like we have from the first speaker, installing renewables onto their community hall. The Remakery in Edinburgh went through a whole evaluation of what action they can take to reduce their carbon footprint, and also the ragtag on the Isle of Skye. So across the board, organisations across Scotland are benefiting from this service. You can be provided with, depending on the level of emissions that you have, a full audit and then hand-holding support through to the installation as well. So there's direct support that can be provided. This is sort of a Scotland-wide support. So I thought I'd then very briefly go on to sort of actually look to see, well, what as an organisation your emissions are likely to be. This was Changeworth's carbon footprint pre-pandemic. You do have to sort of, obviously things have changed in the past year, and our footprint in some ways has been lower, but we've had lots of people working from home. So that's been a big issue. But as you can see, we have got, we operate a lot across Scotland. We manage insulation projects up and down the country. We go and make home visits to either the fuel poor or those interested in installing renewables. So our biggest single item of carbon emissions was fuel for vehicles. And this has actually driven us to change our fleet. We have reviewed the whole process about our fleet management. We've gone mostly over to electric vehicles now, and hybrids where the distance travelled don't make this feasible. And this has actually resulted, because we've taken out longer term leases with cars, we've actually not only reduced our carbon footprint for our vehicles, but also have reduced the cost. The other area obviously was been a year ago, sort of business travel was taking place, but commuting was an issue, which is actually we start thinking about, well, what is that going to be long term, sort of if we're moving into a combination of home working and office based. Looking at actually keeping our building running, it's only with the gas heating and electricity that represents just 22% of our emissions, but there were still things we could do. We made a significant saving on our gas emissions by installing sophisticated heating controls. So having done quite an analysis of what it is, we then took a range of action. That level of detail is probably not appropriate for all organisations. It will depend on what the size of, as much your turnover is, about what's most appropriate. But I have got a few hints about what immediate actions you could be doing. For when we get back into any buildings we have, how you actually manage your heating and your heating controls can make a significant difference. Yes, you can install more sophisticated controls which allow you to control it from PC, but often heating gets put on at the beginning of the heating system and just left to be on, will come on, sort of be on late and come on very early. So by adjusting your heating controls, you can make, everybody is able to make changes to the amount of energy that they use, their carbon emissions. As part of your environmental policy, you need to consider your travel hierarchy. And I think one of the things that we've come to realise with the pandemic is, do we have to travel at all? Seminars such as this taking place actually are much easier to attend often, although we do miss the networking opportunities. Further issue will be coming out of the pandemic is home working and commuting. Some organisations have said, well, by not having offices, you actually save significantly on the heating bills and on commuting. But one of the things which we have found is that with staff working at home, their heating bills have gone up considerably. And with many of our staff actually living quite close to the office and involved in active travel to the office, that hasn't been offset by original commuting. So it is a balance about what you do. This isn't sort of the be all and end all, is just say not having offices, everybody working from home. For those who have responsibility for their utility bills, it's worth considering changing to a renewable tariff rather than being on the standard tariffs, because this does drive the overall market for renewables. For those with investment portfolio, particularly the funders, sort of looking at sort of what is your, is it your decisions need to be taken as whether how much you want to support climate change, or is it just more an active that you look to de-invest with the highest carbon emitters? So the general actions, it is worthwhile looking at calculating your carbon footprint for those who've got more time, because that can look to drive your actions. And finally, for involvement of staff considering how across the organisation they may wish to adhere, I'd recommend sort of the Keep Scotland Beautiful carbon literacy projects. So that was a brief run through about some of the options that are available to you to support you in maybe considering on your individual journeys and looking into climate reduction. So back over to you, Susan.
Thank you very much, Teresa. That was, again, very interesting. I think this is a really interesting topic that what I'm seeing from the research I've been doing into where the voluntary sector is along this journey is that there's still quite a long way to go. So one of the things I wanted to touch on in terms of a question was what role the voluntary sector, some of you have sort of picked up on this, can have in supporting communities to make this change. I was at an event yesterday and I heard some research from Which in terms of consumer behaviour around environmental products, and that ranges from electric cars even just to sort of other products with green labels and so on. And there's a variety of different barriers there to individuals making more climate conscious consumption decisions. And it was quite interesting to see that, for example, more than 40% of people don't even know what net zero means. And organizations have a lack of, individuals have a lack of faith in products. And also they're very confused about what is more environmentally friendly. You know, is it better to buy locally sourced products, or does it depend on the product, you know, etc. And so I'm just wondering what role the voluntary sector could have in supporting society through this big change that we're facing. Carol, I think you picked up on some of this, so I'm going to put that back to you.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's really interesting. I mean, I think particularly for very locally focused projects, you're going to have a lot of trust from the people you work with. So I think part of the problem is that the information may be there, but people don't know who to turn to get it and may not trust it when they get it. So I think as trusted partners, I think the voluntary sector's got an important role to play there. And perhaps it's also by doing as well as telling. You know, if you're using particular cleaning products, then volunteers working with you will see that and will take that over into their lives. I think there's also a role about providing communities with voice. And National Lottery had a climate action programme of grants. It's had 2 rounds of funding, and that was about funding non-environmental organisations to enable communities to have a say on climate or to take action on climate. I think as well, you touched on opportunities, and that there will be opportunities from the transition to the new economy. And I think the voluntary sector's got an important role to play there in ensuring that everyone has the opportunity to benefit from those. And then final thing on the role of voluntary sector is about the climate change assemblies, citizens' assemblies on climate change. Foundations have had a role in funding those, and I know there's been one in Scotland, and civil society's played an important role in that too.
Great, thank you, Carol. Ben, you've seen this in the creative sector, the arts sector, are obviously can have a big impact in influencing their community. Yes,
I think there's a couple of things here. One, just picking up on Carol, what Carol was saying. One of the things I think that we at Creative Carbon Scotland did early on really was just say, we're here and we think this is important, and providing a degree of leadership and putting our heads above the parapet really. When it wasn't, I think probably back in 2010, 2011, I was one of the least popular people possibly in the arts in Scotland. But actually to say that and say we're here and we're here to help actually was quite an important part of it. So just getting things started, I think, was key. And yes, you're absolutely right. As I said earlier, influencing organizations are very important, and cultural organizations, particularly big institutions, theatres and concert halls and so on, they have a role to play in shaping society, I think. So I think they can do a number of things. They can say, this is what we're doing, join us on the journey just by being an example and doing it well. They can also include it in their work in some way. So maybe the work they present or exhibitions or something in the foyer or their programs is really clear about, is working towards climate change. But I suppose one thing I'd like to pose as a challenge, how would it be if both the funders and the recipients of funding said, well, as well as our core aim that we've got, which is looking after that church or providing football for under 10s or something, what if our core aim as well as that was addressing the climate crisis? What if we made that an equal part of our operation? How would that change everything we do? And I think that would be, if we as a group of people started doing that, it would make quite an interesting change to society. So I think actually really elevating it to that degree, which I think Carol has indicated at the beginning of her talk, we need to do. We're in a very challenging situation. We don't have much time. How would it be if we made that commitment and we stopped seeing it just as an operational thing or as something we do as part of our work, and we made it a core bit of our work? I throw that out to the other panelists and the audience.
Yeah, I actually think that's really interesting. My instinct is that your average social care organisation, for example, is not there yet. So I don't know how. So Teresa, what are your thoughts? Do you think, are we doing enough to persuade organisations like that climate change should be an essential part of their charitable purpose?
It has got to be as much part of their decision-making things as sort of any social care things, as sort of their approach to sort of health and safety, risk assessments and the like. It will be that sort of any social care organisation that has operates a building will be required to look to see how there will be regulation required to reduce the emissions. So there is an issue about whether they're leased or not, or where that regulatory support will fall. But there's also, I think, with a lot of social care things, is how do they support their clients? There've been sort of all these social care organisations have stepped up during the coronavirus pandemic, but similarly, that everybody's heating system is going to change. And how do you look to support people in changing their heating system? Because it is not totally straightforward if your heating system's changing, and how can that change? They start looking about, I think, how sort of we've got to ensure there is a just transition as well. I think one of the important things is that people don't get left behind, and that you take people on their journey. We are going to be looking at a whole range of things, sort of about whether your local energy networks and the roles of communities can play in those local energy networks. There's going to be a dramatic change in society. It's not going to be quite as quick as we took place in the pandemic, but there are huge changes coming on in society, so they've got to look to engage with it. And it is not just a one-off activity. Yes, it could be, say, at a church sitting solar panels, but what is everybody in that who attends that community thinking about their own carbon footprint as well, and what they're doing associated with it? So I think it has got to permeate through to everything, because it is such a big changes as a society we've got to go through, and a lot of them will be to the better as well. If you're producing a warmer house, it's easier to heat, and thinking about, say, if you're moving to, say, with your football group that we heard, that actually encourage people to, rather than just everybody driving down there, they actually walk together, and the health implications and benefits that can bring. So the sort of society we will be creating is actually could well be beneficial, but it is required a lot of integration, which is why the voluntary sector is one of these core sort of cultural links within society and within communities. It does have a role to play. How can you put that up agenda so people are just always thinking about it? How can they actually integrate it into their day-to-day activity?
I think that's one of the challenges for us at SCVO, is how we help this organisations to recognise how important this is. That this is the next big threat, similar to COVID, and that if they're not recognising it or not preparing for it in some ways, then both them as organisations and their communities, their service users, will be left behind. Ben, I think you have something to.
Yeah, just picking up on what Teresa was saying about the climate justice element. If you're an organisation that is supporting people who are in some sort of disadvantage, then the chances are that those people are going to be more disadvantaged by climate change in the future. They're the ones who won't have the insurance when their home floods. They may be living in worse accommodation that, as Teresa points out, is harder to heat anyway. Chances are also they won't be the people who cause the climate change, because an awful lot of the emissions come from the wealthier people and the less disadvantaged people, the more advantaged people. So there's a sort of double whammy there. So I think if you're involved in equalities or justice in almost any way, then actually climate change is a really core part of your business. And if you're not thinking about it already, then you probably should be. And I see that David Somerville has just pointed out the City of Edinburgh's 2021 business plan pairs up climate change with tackling poverty as guiding priorities. And I think that's a really important part of it. And the same will be true for organizations that are slightly less involved with social care, but or care of various sorts. But there will be similar elements that apply, I think, there. So I don't think we can avoid it. And I would like to stress, I don't think it's just an operational thing. I do think it's about more than that. One last point, I would say you may not be there already, but it is a journey that is going on around you and other people are taking it as well. So there's no need to be fearful of that. I think that scaffolding can be supported so that you don't need to fear falling. You don't need to fear getting it wrong. There are a few wrong answers and there are lots of right answers, and actually there are people to help.
Yeah, it's interesting, just picking up on something you said there. Again, according to this Which research, which I wish I could share, but I don't have it. It was a webinar yesterday. It is affluent people who are making the lifestyle changes. They're the ones that are making the changes to their homes, to their the way the clothes and the food and so on that they purchase. And that's where I really feel that the voluntary sector has an important role in supporting people who aren't able to take that initiative themselves, who don't have the financial capability to put in solar panels, which seem to cost a fortune, I have to say. But I'm conscious that people are not asking questions, and I'm sure that some of you have questions about the challenges that your organisations might face in this area. So please do submit a question. But before you do so, I think we'll do the second poll, which is about that question of confidence. How confident do you feel about transitioning your organisation to net zero? Are you confident? Yes. Are you not confident? No. It's looking fairly equal at the moment. Okay, that's us. We have 56% of people are not confident about transitioning their organisation to net zero. I also suspect that is higher amongst our participants, because if you've come to this webinar, then you're already thinking about this, or you're already thinking about the fact that you should be thinking about it. How can we help organisations feel more confident? Carol.
I think examples of practice. You know, I've just given one example of the church and the solar panels, and already that's sparking other thoughts. I think just hearing what other organisations are doing is really helpful. So I think peer networks among people that want to take action. That's something we've done with the funder commitment on climate change. If you sign it, you don't have to be an ACF member, you do have to be a funder. Then we've got a package of support for you so that you can talk with others who are taking steps down the road there. So I think that's really important. And I wanted to ask Ben actually about the role of the arts in this, because I think it can feel very overwhelming, and you know, it's great that governments are now starting to talk about meaningful action rather than just saying, oh, it's all too difficult. And I wondered about the role of the arts in helping society feel this sense of collective resolve, that, you know, this is something we must and can and will solve together, and really the arts might play a role in inspiring that and making it feel more possible.
I would agree. I think sometimes the arts is given quite a lot of responsibility in this, so I'm not going to take it all on. But I've been trying for some while to. I've never found quite the time, but I think that Coronation Street and EastEnders and River City and others should all have a climate change storyliner on the team. So it's making sure that in every story, every character, every plot line, climate change is built in, so that it's being thought about in the same way as the Archers has an agricultural consultant. So that the Archers was invented, I think, as a way to tell farmers how to farm better. I think we should be doing that, and I do encourage cultural organisations to think climate in their programming and their work. I don't say to artists you have to write a climate change play, but I do ask arts organisations that I think have a slightly different role to encourage that. But the other thing I think cultural organisations are very good at, and I won't dwell on this for long, but just they're very good about bringing people together, because one of the things is we're not going to solve climate change by lots of individual people acting individually. We do need a social movement, and we need collective action by communities. And I think one thing that cultural organisations are very good at is helping build communities, even from groups of strangers who sit together and share and respond together to performance, or in a gallery they look at work together, or in a library they're sort of behaving in the same way. So I think there is something very important there that cultural organisations can do. And we've actually got a project at the moment called Climate Beacons, which is bringing cultural organisations together with non-cultural organisations in relation to the COP, to spread the climate change, public engagement on climate change around Scotland. So it's not all focused on Glasgow in November.
Great, thanks, Ben. You're the first person to bring up COP, which is obviously one of the things that is focusing everybody's mind this year on climate change. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see as the year goes on how that helps to raise public awareness of this issue. So we've had a question from Mike McGrath about how to persuade management about taking some of these, making some of these actions. Teresa, maybe you have some thoughts there.
As a first step, I would suggest they got a contact, sort of ask them to contact their energy efficient business support, or look at the website there, because that actually gives very concrete ideas, and there is funding available, recognizing sort of it, and the funding there that they do, it's very much a business support service, so they look at the business case there, and it is many of these measures to do with energy efficiency do have payback periods. You are providing with grants there, interest-free loans, so actually financially it can be done without a cost to the organization, and it is sort of probably the most, and a lot of the things are not that expensive. Looking at your heating controls, even with our own homes, looking at our heating controls, how we actually use heating, just gives real savings in terms of finances, because the financial savings are often very beneficial. Getting together a green team can be useful. I think there's one of the reasons we do focus on doing your carbon footprint, which actually need not be that labour intensive, is that it actually shows where your emissions are, and that there can be far more focuses put on, say, because people get interested and excited often about recycling, and it's something very physical. The carbon emissions associated with recycling is minimal compared to what you have on your transport and your energy use. So looking at that, so it's actually understanding where your emissions come from means it can actually take useful drive, because a lot of attention can be diverted away from the key areas of activities. It is, having said that, there is a need though that sort of we do encourage recycling, because that takes people on a journey. Often sort of when they start thinking about looking at recycling, they can be starting looking at energy. So I wouldn't discourage any of those activities, but look to see where the key aspects are. But it has got to be part of those decisions, sort of start raising about it. Well, why are we doing things? That has become one of the things that I think we have seen in the pandemic. People have got to be much more open to challenge about things. So actually it is having those debates that everybody's got a role to play. And certainly with attracting good young staff, you often, the climate emergency is a major driver for employment. So they are going to be looking for people who will want to be making a difference there, and it should be part of their activities.
Thanks very much, Teresa. We've also got an email question from Ellie Sandercock, which is fairly long, Ellie, so I'm not going to read it all out. But she's pointing out that many third sector organisations have a hand-to-mouth existence, and the feasibility of doing their core job while also focusing on climate change and diversity and equality and inclusion can be really challenging. And what role can funders have and SCVO have in supporting organisations? One of the things I actually was really interested in was, Ben, what you said about how you worked with Creative Scotland and ensured that there was a framework for organisations, so that when Creative Scotland asked them to report, they weren't likely to fall through the hoop. You know, there was something there that you were providing those organisations to help them answer those questions. That sounds like a really good model.
I think it was a really good model, and we happened upon it by chance, really. We employed a very good person, and she said, what I need to do is offer, it's not that many, it's 121 organisations that get core funding from Creative Scotland. And we basically said, we'll come and visit you, we'll provide a couple of hours advice. So poor old Fiona travelled the length and breadth of Scotland, going to Shetland and Orkney, the Western Isles, the borders, and everywhere. And it was quite an investment up front, but it's paid off enormously, because I think we now have a relationship. We know those people, we know those organisations, we know where their electricity meter is, and they know us and trust us. And I think the foresight of Creative Scotland in supporting that and providing the cash for that has really paid off in later years. So I think funders can say, look, if there's an area that we're organising, or maybe sectoral organisations, sectoral supporters can say, we need somebody to do this, then it provides that investment at the future. It provides that scaffolding so that nobody needs to feel alone. And I should stress, what Teresa was saying earlier is absolutely right. And we very often point people towards Changeworks, to Keep Scotland Beautiful, to the other agencies that are working on this, because we don't have that level of expertise that they have. And we guide people towards those things. We use those resources. We encourage people to take up real expertise and grants and what have you, because that's not our field. But I think providing that trusted support, and somebody there like our Fiona, who said, well, I know somebody who knows how to deal with this. You know, I can point you to them and make an introduction. I think that's really important.
Can I just ask, who funded you to do that? Was that Creative Scotland as well?
Creative Scotland, yes. I don't think they knew what they were doing, I have to say. I think we sort of said, this is what needs to be done, and they agreed it. But I should say, they, at the very beginning, they said, Ben, here's some money to go and set up this organization. So they were quite foresightful there, and they stuck with us throughout. There are pros and cons. The money's not got as much as I would like, but it's worked up to now. And I think the thing about the arts is a very organized sector, But I think that must be true in sport. It must be true in social care and housing associations and so on. There are sort of organizing, there are trade associations or whatever. And I would really urge people to think about that and pose it to the people further up. Can I just add one last thing? Teresa was absolutely right at all the basics. I also say get somebody on the board, even if they don't know anything about climate change, get them to nominate themselves as the person who's going to look into it and ask the questions at each meeting, because I think that also helps senior management and staff really, it legitimizes and licenses people to spend some time on it, and it really means it's throughout the organization.
That's a really good point. Carol, what do you think? What are your reflections on this example that Ben has of his relationship with Creative Scotland?
Yeah, I think the good news is there will be, because it's rising up funders' agenda, there'll be an increasing amount of funding available for organisations that want to put this as part of their main operations. I think the point about working with boards is really important. One of the funder commitment principles is to educate and learn about climate change impacts, and in the report we just published there's some really interesting ideas about how foundations have tackled that. So some have invited speakers in to address their boards, they've circulated relevant articles and reports, attended training. One of them has even created a learning agenda for all of their board members, which doesn't just relate to climate change, it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion, and all the other issues. So there's some interesting examples there. My heart really goes out, though, to the hard-pressed frontline organisation trying to deliver a service with insufficient funding, and how on earth can you possibly take on board another issue? Mm-hmm. And I think funders are really alive to that. In the report we published, some funders have started to add climate change questions to their application processes. But others have thought, well, we don't want to put the burden on our grantees. We want to come at this from a supportive space. So some foundations have been offering additional resources to grantees to help with higher environmental standards in building projects. I think the point of trying to integrate it into the way you do everything you do, rather than see it as an add-on, is the most constructive way, that you're not seeing it as something additional to your mission, but that you're seeing that climate change actually is part of your mission because of the impact it will have. If you've got to follow your charitable purposes, if you've got a distinct charitable purpose, everything you do has got to be related back to that. But there's lots of interesting thinking about how the climate impacts on charitable purposes. There's a publication by an organisation called 10 Years Time. I'll find the link and send it to you, Susan. It's aimed at funders and helping them to think through, if I'm a heritage funder, what's the climate got to do with me? But it is possible to make those cross connections.
I think one point, important point, is that it is difficult. There is stuff to do. It doesn't all need to be done today, and I think it's important that we need to make a start. That there are changes that need to be made in the future, which we need to start preparing for. And as Teresa says, there are quick, easy things that we can do today that then encourage you on your journey. I think if we in theatres and concert halls and so on, one of the things is that people leave their beer fridges on overnight. And beer doesn't need to be kept cold. Milk does, beer doesn't. So you can turn off your fridge for most of the time, and a theatre bar is only open for a couple of hours. So actually, if you turn on your fridge an hour before the show starts and turn it off half an hour before the audience leave, you've saved 20 hours of electricity, and you save £100 a year on each fridge. That's a really easy thing to do, and that will encourage people to take the next steps. But we don't need to be fearful. We've got to do everything now, and I think sometimes that's the fear that people have. Although
Great,
started.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have got to 2 o'clock, and so I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. We didn't get round to Nick Addington's question about partnership and joined up activity, but hopefully, we may be able to continue this dialogue in future events and so on. So I'm sure we will quite answer these kinds of questions in the future. Thank you so much, all three of you. That this has been really, really interesting and engaging, and I hope that the audience have found it informative. It's giving SCVO, this agenda is giving SCVO much food for thought in terms of how best to support organisations on this journey. And because ultimately supporting organisations is about supporting people. It's about supporting the people of Scotland and the UK to make that transition to net zero in a just and fair way and ensure that nobody's left behind. And I personally think the voluntary sector has got a hugely important role to do in that. And you know, that's why we're doing this project. So just one last point from us is that SCVO is doing a survey to try and find out how far organisations are along this journey, and my colleague has just posted a link to that survey. So if your organisation hasn't yet filled in that survey, please take a look and fill in as much as you possibly can. Some of it asks quite specific questions about your energy use. Either talk to a colleague or just fill in as much as you possibly can, and that will help us to get a bit of a baseline for where the sector is on this journey. So, and anybody who is interested in this agenda, please feel free to drop me a line at any point, and I'm happy to talk about it and engage with you in it, and just watch SCVO for more information about how this develops. Thank you very much to Teresa Bray from Changework, Sven Twist from Creative Carbon Scotland, and Carol Mack from the Association of Charitable Foundations. And thank you very much, everyone, for coming.